Anger flares after brutal action by Chinese pandemic prevention workers. Their killing of a pet dog caught on tape. Top-level dialogue between the U.S. and China, but without a major breakthrough. President Biden and Communist Party leader Xi Jinping formally met for the first time since Biden took office. Though after the meeting, Beijing again sent military aircraft flying over Taiwan in an apparent threat to the self-ruled island. An elderly mother seeks to visit her only son imprisoned in China, but she's faced multiple rejection by authorities, all because of her son's human rights activism. And reports say Beijing is again lobbying U.S. business communities, this time to influence legislation that would boost U.S. competitiveness. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. First, a look at the latest on China's pandemic control. Security footage related to China's prevention measures has sparked outrage on social media. The clip, captured inside a residential home, shows health workers striking a pet corgi while its owner was in quarantine and not at home. The dog was later killed off-screen. It's the latest example of extreme measures in the country's pursuit of zero COVID. And a warning, some viewers may find the following footage disturbing. Will Ripley has more.
Even in China, with some of the world's harshest pandemic protocols, what you're about to see crossed a line. Security footage from Southeast China Friday sparking outrage on Chinese social media, shared by a devastated dog owner. Some viewers may want to look away. COVID prevention workers forced their way into a locked apartment, one with a plastic bag, the other a crowbar. Did the leader say we need to settle it right on the spot, one says? Yes, the other replies, before taking a swing at the head of a small corgi, cowering behind a table. The dog whimpers, runs to another room. The workers off camera finish the job.
Absolutely heartbreaking, shocking, and totally brutal.
And in your view, completely unnecessary.
There is no justifiable reason why this should ever be done to a companion animal.
The dog owner in quarantine. No pets allowed. A handful of people in her building tested positive for COVID. She tested negative. Her dog was never tested. Some Chinese cities like Shanghai allow people to quarantine with their pets. In many places, pet owners are forced to leave their animals behind. A local government statement confirms the corgi was killed as part of a need to thoroughly disinfect homes in the area. The workers safely disposed of the dog, the statement says. They apologized for failing to fully communicate with the owner, both no longer on the job. CNN reached out to the dog owner and authorities. So far, no response. Other pets have died in China's zero COVID crackdown, including these cats in September, killed without their owner's consent. She was in the hospital with the virus.
There's no scientific evidence that dogs and cats can spread COVID to humans. There is a risk if an infected person were to touch or handle a cat or a dog, but that would be exactly the same risk as if you were touching a doorknob after an infected person.
Less than 3 months before the Winter Olympics in Beijing, China accused of extreme measures to fight a fresh outbreak. Millions of people under mandatory lockdowns. Just over 1,300 reported cases nationwide. Chinese authorities under tremendous pressure to eliminate the virus. Some call this a heartbreaking example of unchecked government power in the name of public health.
And while more and more people are keeping pets in China, there are no laws against animal cruelty. The strict measures to prevent the spread of the CCP virus result from the so-called zero-case policy of the Chinese regime. That means as long as a single case emerges, the whole neighborhood or even a big area of the city will be put under lockdown. And anyone who's had direct or indirect contact with the patient must take a virus test. While the authorities want to stop the virus from spreading, this method also seriously impacts everyday life. Many other countries are instead turning to a policy of coexistence with the virus. They hope to contain the infection with vaccines and at the same time loosen restrictions on people's activities. Meanwhile, China is keeping the strategy it had last year when the pandemic just began. In the northeastern city of Dalian, 800,000 people are currently under quarantine. Beijing will host the Winter Olympics in a few months. And the regime is boosting its preventative measures, even going as far as testing imported frozen food and children's clothing. A significant conversation between the U.S. and China without significant results. U.S. President Biden and Communist China's leader Xi Jinping met for about 3.5 hours in a video call. Both sides said they see basic communication as key to avoiding a major crisis. But the talk offered no breakthroughs.
Good evening to everyone here in the United States, and good morning to you, Mr. President, in Beijing.
In the latest and most anticipated virtual summit, U.S. President Joe Biden and Communist China's leader Xi Jinping sought a reset in relations on Monday. Both stressed open communication and friendly competition as they sat for hours of virtual talks. The virtual summit was aimed at relieving tensions between Beijing and Washington. Their relationship soured over trade negotiations, Beijing's expanding nuclear arsenal, and Taiwan, all topics covered in this meeting. Also addressed in the discussion were North Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, global energy markets, the climate, and the pandemic.
It seems to me we need to establish some common sense guardrails to be clear and honest where we disagree and work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change.
Calling Biden an old friend,
I am very happy to see my old friend.
Xi stressed the need for mutual respect. And Biden emphasized the importance of working together on global issues like climate change.
As I've said before, it seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. Just simple, straightforward competition.
The White House said Biden also raised concerns over Beijing's practices in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, as well as its overall record on human rights. Prior to Monday's meeting, Xi and Biden had outlined competing global visions. Biden has called for a free and open Indo-Pacific, seen as pushback against what many see as China's coercion in the region. And Xi has said the region must not return to the tensions of the Cold War era. The contentious issue of whether the U.S. will send White House envoys to the Beijing Winter Olympics in February did not come up. But they did reach a consensus on journalist visas. Chinese state media China Daily reported on Tuesday, China and the U.S. will ease restrictions on access for journalists from each other's countries. The Trump administration had imposed 90-day work visa limits on all Chinese journalists.
And while the U.S. and China want to stabilize their relationship, their sharp differences regarding the self-ruled island of Taiwan remain during their talk. In a statement released after the meeting, Biden reaffirmed America's commitment to the One China policy, but he also said he, quote, strongly opposes unilateral efforts to change the status quo or undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. According to China state media outlet Xinhua, Xi said those in Taiwan who seek independence and their U.S. supporters were playing with fire. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own and has been putting pressure on the democratic island to succumb to its rule. Soon after the meeting, Taiwan's defense officials said 8 aircraft from China had entered Taiwan's Southwest Air Defense Identification Zone. It's the first time Biden and Xi have met formally since Biden took office in January. U.S. officials described the tone of the meeting as respectful and straightforward, and China says the meeting was fruitful.
The leaders of the two countries believe that the meeting was candid, constructive, substantive, and fruitful.
That's what China's foreign ministry said on Tuesday after a virtual meeting between U.S. President Biden and Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping. Their talks on Monday ended with the two leaders agreeing they should tread carefully during a time of particularly high tensions. According to the ministry, China is confident it can maintain its strength, but is open to improving relations with the U.S., while both leaders restated long-standing policy positions on Taiwan and other issues. U.S. officials described the overall tone of the dialogue as respectful and straightforward.
President Biden was clear where he believed that certain of the PRC's actions are potentially destabilizing, and he stressed the need to develop ways to manage strategic risk and to put into place common sense guardrails to ensure that competition doesn't veer into conflict.
What's more, Taiwan has paid particular attention to the U.S.-China meeting.
The Biden administration has repeatedly reiterated that the United States' commitment to Taiwan is rock solid, and we will continue to pay close attention to the interaction between the United States and China.
At a weekly press conference, Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it will continue to promote its global partnership with the U.S. Despite rising tensions and areas of disagreement, experts see the summit dialogue as sending a positive signal on improving ties.
We see a turning point. We see, the continuous deterioration and downward spiral be kept at a certain level now. Maybe become a stable, or even uplifting a bit of the relations.
But we have to remember that the long-term structural challenges between the United States and China have really yet to be addressed by these two leaders and these two governments in any way.
In the meantime, the White House has set low expectations for the meeting. No major announcements nor a joint statement were delivered.
A Chinese human rights defender was sentenced to 12 years in prison. His mother, approaching 90, is in bad health. She asked to meet with her only son multiple times, but was rejected every time. She says she hopes she'll see her son at least once more while she's still alive.
The mother of a Chinese human rights defender is offering her support in a message for him, announcing, "Huang Qi, my son, mother believes you are innocent." Chinese authorities have jailed and tortured Huang Qi for more than 5 years because he reported human rights violations in China.
I can't find out any news about my son. Anyway, I cannot get approval to see my son. I also asked the Zhejiang Public Security Bureau to visit Beijing prison. They didn't approve it. Besides, the lawyer that Huang Qi hired, his lawyer's license was revoked.
Huang Qi's mother, Pu Wenqing, is almost 90. She said whenever she had requested to meet with her son, she was told that the computer system was upgrading or malfunctioning, so she couldn't schedule a time to meet. Then she asked to talk with her son on the phone, but that was also rejected. After Huang Qi was arrested, Pu kept appealing for his release. Since 2019, the local authorities have put her under house arrest and banned visitors. She was also subjected to physical abuse.
On those days, I had nowhere to turn for help. No one dared to talk with me. It was unbearable. As long as I went out, someone always followed me, even to the bus.
Pu says she's been diagnosed with heart failure. She couldn't eat or sleep well.
I'm seeing a doctor recently. My heart isn't well right now. I think this winter will be hard for me because I have heart failure. I just want to see Huang Qi before I die.
Pu also said earlier this month, local authorities set out 3 restrictions for her.
Firstly, I'm not allowed to go to Beijing. Secondly, I cannot accept interviews from any media outlets. And thirdly, I'm not allowed to hire human rights lawyers.
Huang Qi is the founder of China's human rights news website, named after June 4th. This date alludes to the massacre on Tiananmen Square in Beijing during a student movement in 1989. The website speaks out for victims of the massacre and for other groups who've been silenced in China. Huang had successively hired 3 defense lawyers, but all their attorneys' licenses were revoked after defending him.
More than 30 years have passed since the massacre at Tiananmen Square. What is the Chinese regime's official stance on the issue? A resolution from a major meeting of Chinese Communist Party officials published on Tuesday shows there is no difference in their approach. It says in 1989, the support and incitement of hostile forces against communism and socialism in the world led to serious political disturbances in China. And it praises CCP for, quote, opposing unrest with a clear-cut stand, defending the socialist state power and safeguarding the fundamental interests of the people. Reports that Beijing is at it again, trying to exert its influence over U.S. legislation. In recent weeks, Beijing has supposedly been pushing American business groups and individuals to fight China-related bills in Congress. That's according to Reuters, citing 4 sources familiar with the matter. Those sources say China's embassy in Washington had pressed business executives to reach out to Congress members, asking them to alter or drop bills that seek to enhance U.S. competitiveness. Reuters confirms that a letter sent by the embassy's Economic and Commercial Office says the same. The letter also said U.S. companies will lose market share or revenue in China if the measures become law. The sources also pointed out that recipients of the letter could be seen as violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That's if they are found to lobby lawmakers on related topics in the future. All of them have asked not to be identified. On top of that, reports say other letters were also sent out individually. According to Reuters, they clearly asked companies to oppose the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, as well as the EAGLE Act, also known as Ensuring American Global Leadership and Engagement Act. The language of the letter states the result of the bills is, quote, only going to hurt everyone. Two sources said similar messages were conveyed in meetings with staff of China's embassy. The U.S. is bringing in more imports from China than any other country, and most of those Chinese goods are coming by sea. Because of that, shipping costs are a critical factor impacting consumer prices in the U.S. Shipping rates from China to the U.S. have fallen dramatically over the past week. That's according to the Freightos Baltic Index. Rates from China to the West Coast were down 21%, while costs from China to the East Coast dropped 16%. But prices are still more than 3 times higher than they were at the start of the year. A supply chain expert says inflation is leading to less discretionary spending in America. That means fewer international purchases. China has also seen a recent production slowdown, leading to fewer goods being ready to ship. On top of that, many orders for the busy holiday season are already in. But the expert also says he doesn't expect shipping rates to get back to pre-pandemic levels. An update on tensions in the South China Sea. Japan and the U.S. are conducting a joint drill there on Tuesday. This as Beijing keeps expanding its control of the waters. The South China Sea sits between China, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. The body of water and keeping China in check within it is critical for America's safety. Experts say that's where Chinese nuclear submarines could safely hide from detection in the case of a Chinese offensive on the U.S. That's because the waters are deep enough to conceal vessels from being tracked by the U.S. If that were to happen, a surprise submarine-based nuclear attack on America could become possible. Right now, multiple countries lay claim to the South China Sea, but China claims most of it, marked by its so-called 9-dash line. Many other nations don't acknowledge that marker. But Beijing has been gradually occupying more of the area anyway, even turning its coral reefs into military bases. Right now, Beijing already controls some of the most important reefs there, like the Paracel Islands in the west, the Spratlys in the south, and the Scarborough Shoal in the east. The Chinese woman who snuck into Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort while Trump was president is being deported almost 2 years after serving her jail sentence. The Chinese national was found to have lied to Secret Service agents and entered the resort while Trump was on the resort grounds. Investigators found her with devices meant to detect hidden cameras and microphones, as well as various other electronic equipment. She was also found with a flash drive that contained computer virus malware. The court could not clarify whether or not she was a spy and what her intention was, but she was convicted of trespassing and lying to federal officers. After serving 8 months in prison, she was transferred to immigration authorities. They say they held her almost 2 additional years because the pandemic didn't allow them to deport her back to China sooner. And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have an announcement. From this week on, special reports will broadcast every Wednesday. Here's a short glimpse into our next episode. Brands from around the world aim to sell their products in China to its 1.4 billion strong population. But there's one problem business leaders from Steve Jobs to Elon Musk have had to deal with in exchange for that market access: copycats. Many major brands have gotten dragged into years-long legal disputes to protect their trademarks. Sometimes the real brands are even forced to apologize and pay millions of dollars in compensation to their copycats. It's all made possible by a practice known as trademark squatting. In this special report, we look at 7 companies that found themselves caught in the trap.